Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to folks who are watching this, both live and in the recording. My name is Dylan Rodriguez, he, him pronouns. I'm here in my capacity as the co-director of the Center for Ideas in Society, and I'm a distinguished professor in the Department of Black Study and the Department of Media and Cultural Studies here at UC Riverside. It's a privilege, it's an honor to welcome you to this public conversation between my dear colleague, collaborator, comrade, and friend, Elyse L. Ambrose, who is my co-worker here at the university in the departments of religious studies and the Department of Black Study, and Professor Leonard Curry, who is from the Department of Theology at Xavier University. They will be discussing our newly tenured colleague, Professor Ambrose's book, A Blackqueer Sexual Ethics, Embodiment, Possibility, and Living Archive. Please know that the event is being recorded for potential posting on the Center for Ideas in Society YouTube channel. For folks who are here, the captions should be available on your Zoom interface. For folks that are watching the recording, they should also be available on your YouTube interface. Also, for folks who are here live, because we are big time at the Center for Ideas in Society, know that we will be raffling off 2 copies of the book to people who are here in attendance. So pay attention to the chat near the end of the hour. Many universities that have inherited the spoils of colonialism and the trafficking of enslaved people routinely introduce campus events with official land acknowledgements. I will not be participating in that practice today. I join many others who reject the institutionalized versions of the university land acknowledgement because we experience it as a normalization and legitimation of ongoing colonial power and violence. I, along with many of you, reject this. Allow me instead to welcome you to this event in the spirit of collective activation rather than passive acknowledgement. Perhaps our time together will further inform and inspire us to cultivate forms of study, creativity, relation, and community that will eliminate the need for colonial land acknowledgements at the University of California and elsewhere. UCR is a settler colonial institution that occupies unceded land and ecologies continuously inhabited by the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples on and around the campus. In the spirit of this inhabitation, I invoke the shared life work of Rupert and Jeanette Costo, who devoted themselves to reclaiming, protecting, and sustaining Indigenous presence at UC Riverside. Their legacies, including co-founding the American Indian Historical Society and the Indian Historian Press, serve as a constant reminder that Indigenous, Aboriginal, and First Nations peoples from all over the world are students and workers at this campus. I continue by honoring Taisha Miller, whose 19-year-old soul was stolen by Riverside Police Department officers while unconscious in her car just a few blocks from the UC Riverside campus, not long before I started working here. Her absence is a permanent testament to the centrality of anti-Black state violence to this institution and the surrounding geography. I honor the lives and spirits of those seeking relief from the decrepit, extraordinary conditions of carceral torture at the California State Prison in Norco, where UC Riverside proudly and unironically runs an accredited college education program. I honor the lives and spirits lost under the supervision of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, with which UC Riverside has a cooperating police relationship. Finally, I honor the lives and spirits of co-workers, students, and surrounding community members who have experienced harassment, intimidation, surveillance, profiling, and criminalization by the University of California's police departments, as well as its administrators, including and especially members of the UC Boards of Regents. I humbly offer these words as a reminder of the conditions surrounding the space of today's precious conversation. I'm honored and privileged to welcome you by calling forward new, old, collective, and experimental efforts to create decolonized, abolitionist, liberated futures. Welcome to all of you, and it's now my pleasure to pass the mic to Professor Leonard Curry.
Thank you, Professor Rodriguez. Wow, right? What an acknowledgement. What a powerful anti-land acknowledgement. Thank you for that. Thank you for setting the stage. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Leonard Curry, professor or assistant professor, maybe one day professor, assistant professor of theology at Xavier University of Louisiana. And I'm so glad to be here with my dear friend and colleague, Professor Elyse Ambrose, Dr. Elyse Ambrose. Dr. Ambrose and I have been colleagues in the field, in the industry. We've been knowing each other for about 10 years now. And I'm really excited to see these ideas that have been sparked and imagined and have been worked over and worked through and worked with and worked from. I'm excited to see them manifest themselves today as a book. A Blackqueer Sexual Ethics. So Dr. Ambrose will start off this conversation with a presentation about this work, setting the stage for us, and then we'll have a short conversation followed by a conversation open to the group. With that said, Dr. Ambrose.
Thank you so much, Dr. Curry. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you for being you. Thank you also, Dylan, Dr. Rodriguez, for yes, that moving opening that I think sets the stage in such an important way for what we'll be talking about today, or for any conversation that can transpire on this land, in this place. Thanks also, Catherine, Bianca, everyone that had to do with anything in the makings of this moment. Thanks everyone who is here. So in the spirit of honoring, I also want to take the time before we begin today to honor Black queer ancestors that have been inspiration and wind and breath to me throughout the duration of producing this book. We're all waving our books in the air, so I'll wave mine. Um, so those who have actively and in many ways resisted religious violence, resisted the sundering of their bodies from their spirits and minds, Black queer activists, scholars in that same lineage of ancestry. And also want to honor all the folks who are cited in the book. My citational politic is such that I try to cite as many people as possible, especially Black women. But the citation politic is real in that it is a practice of helping my audience to know what voices matter to me, what conversations matter, and recognizing that can I say that there's nothing new under the sun, but maybe more I want to say that there is no such thing, just to bring up some of my art, there's no such thing as autopoiesis, no self-making as I understand it. There's always this pluripoiesis, these many ways that we are made and these many convergences that come together to form our making. So the book is an expression of that. So I want to honor all those folks too. Okay, so thinking of a good way to start us on this conversation, I thought it could be important or maybe just helpful for grounding me to begin with art, visual representation, visual culture. Let's see if I can lower this. I might be blocking this a little bit. Okay, here we go. So what we're looking at is a picture from a photographic series, a photosonic series, ongoing photosonic series of Black, queer, and trans practitioners of spiritualities, the sacred, the religious, that began several years ago when I was facing writer's block in the writing of this book. So that exhibition, which was first shown at the L Street Fine Arts Gallery in San Diego during the annual meeting of the American Academy of Religion, was entitled Spirit in the Dark Body, Black Queer Expressions of the Immaterial. And I just want to say here, shout out to my friend Gerald Parks, the late Gerald Parks, who was my comrade through my master's program, and my brother, my sibling in the struggle for grounding Black queer lives in the study of religion. And this exhibition was dedicated to him. So it feels right to invoke him now too. So that photosonic exhibition, Spirit in the Dark Body, Black Queer Expressions of the Immaterial. Some of those images made it to the book. But where I began, and where I want us to start today is sitting with these stories, sitting with maybe the visual in a way that it's able to help us to presence what words sometimes cannot. So here is our subject in this photo entitled African Diasporic Queer Spiritualist Woman, taken in Atlanta 2019. And you see, I'll just describe some of what's there. We are at a river in Georgia at night. So as the photographer, a little uncomfortable for me, but in collaboration with my subjects, I often, want to bring their presence, what matters to them into the story, not just my artistic vision as an artist, but what was meaningful to them. So the river was meaningful to them. And it became nightfall while we were out there. So it was wild if you've ever been, in the forest at night and there's not a lot of light. But there is SD standing in the river, candles by her side, a bell in her right hand, protective beads and eleke around her neck, informed by her Ifa ordination or her priestesshood within the Ifa tradition, and a Bible in her left hand. And here's how Esty speaks of her Black queerness and her spiritualities, her multiple religious belongings. Esty, as a Southern woman and womanist, conceives of her spirituality on an individual and communal level. Deriving a definition of spirituality from the nation of Ndugu and Nzinga, an African-centered rites of passage collective, she states, spirituality is, quote, one's ability to walk with, hear, and know the Creator. Connection with, quote, that core primary energy that we all carry, that all created things carry, Esty claims, shapes how she moves in the world. For Esty, quote, spirituality has to be about one's own self-development and self-awareness as it is about the energy that is outside, within, and around us. She says, if you want to know God, you got to know yourself. If you want to see God, you got to be able to look in the mirror. Another that I want to share is of Charlie. This is Charlie in a tub doing one of his painting rituals by which he connects with the spirit world. So he also has protective beads around his neck and neon colored paints on his hand and his nude body. And he's in somewhat of a state of a trance when he gives me this permission to photograph what he's doing here, or we can say in a state of spiritual connectivity. This is his ritual for doing so. So this is I Am a Gatekeeper, I Am Multiplicities, New York City, 2019. So Charlie connects spiritually through their art. It is their ritual. Born in the Dominican Republic, Charlie was mothered and nurtured by women there in various spiritual traditions and forms of ritual. Today, they carry the same multiplicity in their understanding of their, quote, multi-dimensional, multi-faith, multi-spirit spirituality. Charlie says of spirituality that it is, quote, the core of every soul in connection to the multiplicities in the universe, and includes the dimensions that you travel in the multi-layers of experiences, quantum leaping, memories that bring you back to stages. It's all intertwined. So I shared these two stories as an entry point for our conversation because not only because they sort of blow my mind when I think about the not only the innovation, but the the otherwise possibilities that Blackqueerness presences within, or let's say in engagement with religion, the sacred, spiritualities. As you see in both of these stories, there were multiple instances of what I call transreligiosity, and we'll talk about that in a moment. You see these connections with the practitioners seeing themselves in direct relation to God, and that sort of, or to the divine, and that sort of connection is also mediated through particular rituals or practices. It has this individual or this personal component, but it also has this communal component, whether it's from the nation of Ndugu and Nzinga, or it's from the women who hold these traditions. And so I was sitting with these stories like these, experiences like these that I had from being a part of communities in Atlanta and in New York City and different places that I lived, where I observed this complexity, this what Anthony Pinn calls complex subjectivity among Black queer practitioners of spirituality, religiosity, the sacred. And I couldn't quite put my finger on how to put that into words. And so the images needed to speak for themselves, and so did the words that I gleaned from the practitioners in through interviews, oral histories that we engaged that make up chapter 3 of my book. But what I found within these stories that were often counter to the stories of trauma, or, and not to say that there wasn't trauma there as it related to queerness and religion or spirituality, that was definitely present. But frequently in the study of religion, what is foregrounded is this oppositional relationship between queerness and religion. But what I was observing was something else. And so I started with this question of how does it feel to be a problem, but it's crossed out. And I get that question from W.B. Du Bois in The Souls of Black Folks, as he's speaking to a particular time and place in the United States around this question of the Negro problem. How does it feel to be a problem? Well, as I sat with stories like these, as I sat with Black queer Harlem, as I sat with nearly, let's say, nearly 40 years of Black queering discourse, I wasn't stuck on the question of how does it feel to be a problem. I actually began the book with the question of how does it feel to be a possibility, for in these examples, in what I call this living archive, overflowed possibility for me. So that's where we began. So the book is entitled A Blackqueer Sexual Ethics, Embodiment, Possibility, and Living Archive, Sexual Ethics. And so it felt important, and Dr. Curry brought this to my attention, to maybe talk about how am I defining sexuality when I talk about sexual ethics in the book. So I'll say first, I'm informed by James B. Nelson in this definition of sexuality. It is one that a titan in the study of Black religion and sexuality, Kelly Brown Douglas, also uses this definition. But Nelson talks about sexuality as who we are as body selves, who experience the emotional, cognitive, physical, and spiritual need for intimate communion. So already, this definition of sexuality is taking us out of the realm of mere sex acts, or a list of rules and do's and don'ts and what is allowed in the sex act, and more into this space of relationality, more into this space of the integrative. That sexuality is not in a special category and held off to the side, held outside of the self, and should be governed by a different set of rules than everything else that we're functioning in as a human, but rather that it is as integrated as our emotional life, as integrated as our cognitive life, our physical life, our spiritual life. This is all integrated in what it is to be a human, and none of it is held apart. All of it is informing one another. And so on this topic of body selves and this idea of the integrative, as I call it in the book, as opposed to the disintegrative, that creates a dichotomy between body and spirit. And this is not only a relic of an expression of Enlightenment thought, but also an expression of Christian thought. Terence Keall does a great job of he has a book on how Christianity informs and undergirds scientific racism. So I commend that book to you. You can just Google it. But I'll say part of what's important for our consideration is the ways that within Christianity, there was and remains this dichotomy between the body and the mind, or the body and the spirit, wherein the body is held within a suspicious sort of space. The body is not to be trusted. The body actually acts in opposition to the spirit or to the mind, and it must be subdued. And as it would happen, as it so often happens in history, that which is diminished, it tends to be associated with Blackness, also tends to be associated with the feminine. But as it is associated with Blackness, and the body is diminished, what we have is a neglect of the whole person, a neglect of the integrative. And this is where this book seeks to make an intervention. And so my Black queer living archive, not only the stories, the oral histories of Black queer practitioners, but also Black queering discourse, as I mentioned. So I have here, bottom right, Ibrahim Abdurrahim Farajaje, the late scholar who is foundational in bringing together Black queerness, Black gay lives, Black gay study, Black queer, Black trans, Black folks impacted by HIV/AIDS. He brings this conversation together in religion, as well as I have here in the sort of orange colored top, Renee Hill, who is one of the first to critique womanism for its distancing from its lesbian sisters, lesbian siblings in the formulation of the discourse. And so I placed them here. Renee Hill is still with us, but I placed them here just as like foundational thinkers that inform this project, as well as the Black Queer Harlem. So I have here a ticket from a rent party, and I can say more about that in Q&A if it's helpful, but it sounds like what it is. These spaces of economic need, but also of gender and sexual nonconformity, wherein folks are able to let their hair down and not only resist the racism of the larger public of New York City, but resist the respectability of the smaller public, but a public nonetheless, Black Queer Harlem being a counter public that embraces the body, embraces the flesh, and allows for a different kind of living and thriving that may not have been available outside of these spaces, as well as the Hamilton Lodge Ball and blues environments. And, you know, while we're here, I happen to have my book turned to a song by, let's say, Ma Rainey, early mother of the blues. And I wanna read a little bit of this because I know a lot of folks don't listen to the blues anymore, but as a Southern person myself, as a lover of music, and as, excuse me, a person who knows the ways that blues has influenced gospel, has influenced, I would even say, rap, hip hop music, it feels important to read a little bit of what we mean by blues environments, those environments that begin to be shaped by the visions that are put forward by this music. So these are words from Ma Rainey, Prove It On Me Blues, written in 1928. And this is actually written and sang by Ma Rainey, which is a little rare because sometimes the blues songs were written by men and others, but she wrote this one. She says, I looked up, to my surprise. The gal I was with was gone. Where she went, I don't know. I mean to follow everywhere she goes. And sorry, I'm reading it more like a poem rather than in my blues um, drag. I don't have it for you, but just imagine. She goes on to say, went out last night with a crowd of my friends. They must have been women because I don't like no men. It's true, I wear a collar and a tie. I'll stop there. She goes on to say, wear my clothes just like a fan, talk to the gals just like any old man. 'Cause they say I do it, ain't nobody caught me. Sure gotta prove it on me. So there we see Ma Rainey playing with constructions of masculinity, the ways that she embodies this sort of bravado, the ways that in a lot of ways Ma Rainey is an exemplar, but also an expression of a larger environment that also plays with gender in this way, that also plays with sexuality in this way, that also disrupts notions of who a woman, particularly a Black woman, in the 1920s should be. And a lot of people are upset about that. So they absolutely had to make up this book. And just pointing out the last picture down at the bottom is renowned writer, Black feminist, thinker, feeler, all around amazing person, Alexis DeVoe, also from Harlem. So I needed to include her there. And her photo, I am a Black feminist queer planet is the name of that photo. But elaborating this archive, because it's so essential to the foundation that builds the constructive piece of the work, and reaching broadly with this archive, wanting to move away from these individual figures like Langston Hughes or Zora Neale Hurston, who we honor and love, but also recognize that they are singular pictures, somewhat exceptional in the way that they're able to move about. And a part of my practice in writing about ethics is to go to communities, the everyday people, because I ultimately argue that it's in the quotidian, it's in the everyday that ethics are made. Notions of the good, notions of what is quote unquote good and right. And we can talk more about that later, but really within a liberative ethical framework, notions of what is more just, what moves us toward liberative possibility, right? This is what we mean by ethics. And being informed by an expansive archive, because as I say, imagination really rarely exceeds the limits of a chosen archive. Our imagination rarely exceeds what we're regarding as significant enough to be shaping an archive. And so this is my way of saying these stories, these people, these communities, these names we might never know, these are important and they make up the archive and allow space for more expansive imagination about what a liberative sexual ethic, which is also a liberative communal ethic, looks like. So again, this is my living archive. I'll just move through this. This will be my last slide here. In thinking about just 4 interventions that I see this book making, primarily by way of method. So, as I've mentioned, this liberative approach to ethics, one that is communally centered and is focused on the question of liberation, strategies toward liberation, and you'll find that I often say toward because it's as my colleague in Black Studies, Sage Whitson says, it's this act of unarrival. that is embedded in Blackness. And so we don't actually ever arrive there, but we do move toward, I would argue. So toward liberative ways of being, as well as liberative methods that allow us to foreground Black queer ways of knowing, Black queer epistemologies, Black queer life. Also, as I mentioned before, moving away from these rules-based ethics of do's and don'ts. This is the things that we can do: no fornicating, no masturbation, no whatever, towards a relations-based ethic. So it becomes important to be thinking about how are we in relation to one another. Not only what are we doing, but how are we relating to one another, and that how will tell us about the ethics of our ways of relating in sexual ways. And so one of my jokes that I like to tell about this is that in this way it becomes less ethical to, for instance, be dishonest and fake an orgasm, rather than a question of, are we fornicating? Are we committing sexual acts that are queer or what have you? Are we engaged in BDSM? These yeses and nos, these do's and don'ts don't matter as much as the honesty that can inform a relationship, and that maybe that's more important in thinking about how we relate. Can we be honest enough within our relations? And that's just, one example. Again, foregrounding justice love within this study. And again, that's something that we're moving toward when we think about the liberative, and finally, the transreligious. And I'll say a little bit more about this because this is where my current work is residing a good bit. This concept builds a bridge from my past work to my current work. So I'll say a little bit more about it. Transreligious meaning a crossover and beyond religion, and I elaborate what I mean there, but it's important because frequently when we're talking about Black religion, and we can look at the scholarship on this, folks are often talking about Christianity. And one gets the sense that, much like in our dominant social discourse, Christianity becomes the hegemonic logics by which we begin to understand society, and in this case, how we begin to understand Black religion. To recognize that there's more to the story of this, and this is not to diminish Christianity, but it's to point out the ways that it has become a dominant discourse, to the neglect of African traditional religions, other diasporic religions and spiritualities like Vodou or Candomblé or Lukumi, right? All of these religions and even spiritualities, non-religions, various approaches of the spiritual, not religious, rituals that come from intuitive understandings. All of this makes up what I consider to be the trans-religious. And it comes from this idea of not attempting to fit Black queerness within the study of religion, but seeing what Black queerness, how Black queerness exists in itself, and how we might learn something of the religious beginning there. So making a subject of Black queerness rather than a subject of religion, and that as we make Black queerness that subject, our method, our approach necessarily has to be trans-religious. So actually, this will be my last one. This is where I land in the constructive piece, toward communal belonging as a means of establishing liberative sexual ethics, toward individual and collective becoming, toward goodness, toward shared thriving, toward embodied spirits and spirited bodies, right? Breaking that binary, that dichotomy I was talking about between bodies and spirit, or body and mind. And the archive leads me to this place. this sort of sexual ethic that is interested in whole beings, interested in life and possibility, and interested in the ways that Black queerness might inform not just Black queer people, but all of us towards more liberative ways of relating to one another and being in right relationship to one another. So I will stop there and hand it back over to Leonard, Dr. Curry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ambrose, for that wonderful presentation. And many of the questions that I have you answered. So I think that what I'll do is I'll raise a couple of questions. Y'all pay attention to that chat. I'll raise a couple of questions that I don't think I heard you speak to. Just, by way of conversation, because I'm curious. And then we can open it up to the audience to take questions. So you all be prepared with your questions, with your musings about possibility or living archive. Make sure you drop those in the chat, and then we'll go from there. All right, so you answered my question about like, what is this book about? Why'd you write it? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious if you could just speak to how you feel about this current moment, like your book landing in this moment in the United States. I know that books are, and scholars writing, it's this weird thing of being in time and out of time, right? Like your project might take place over a decade before we get to see it. And the thing that you've been working on was sparked 10 years ago. But then it lands in the world at a certain time. Maybe it raises a flag and builds community. Maybe it goes on to create a legacy that you don't anticipate. So I guess I'm just curious if you could speak to that, your book landing in this moment and that kind of weirdness about scholarship and time.
Yeah, that's a great question. You're right, it was a decade. From the very beginning to this moment, just about a decade. And it's interesting for me to do the kind of time travel where these were the concerns that I was thinking about at the time. And these are also concerns that I find myself making peace with and integrating into my own life. I like to joke, I have trust issues. So I don't believe, I hadn't believed what the scholarship had said up to that point to the question of like, Blackqueer sexual ethics. So I had to go ahead and create that work. And the late Dr. James Cone also pushed me in that direction when I had the opportunity to be on a panel with him during my master's work. And so, research is me search. I hate it, but I said it. And it's interesting, and maybe at times sort of like mind-blowing to be in that place and in this place where I'm thinking of new questions and sort of what it means to revisit not only the work, but the feelings, angst, questions that I had at the time, and to sort of just relive it in real time with everyone. And to, in a lot of ways, maybe make peace with some of those questions that I might have made partial peace with in the writing, but I also had to go through the whole act of publishing, which created its own kind of ruptures in my well-being. So it's been an act of making peace. But when we think about like this current social or political moment, socio-political moment, nationally, worldwide, communally, you know, it's this moment is this moment, and also it has extended for decades. Black queer Harlem teaches me that. And hopefully one day it'll be irrelevant. But what I will say is that the work that I do, I never want to think of it as sort of like this final word. I always see myself as sort of like contributing to a conversation. And so that allows me to model some of the humility that I hope shines through in the book, that just like there are some mistakes, there are some shortcomings to this text, and also it's contributing to an ongoing conversation of Black queer liberation, Black liberation, the people's liberation. And so I hope it does that to some extent, and is a helpful tool. And yeah, that's how I think of it, and I hope it can function in that way.
Beautiful. I have so many questions that are around this kind of like legacy flag raising,
Mhm.
like political moment. I think the one that's burning for me is just I got to a part of your book in the constructive section where you were talking about the Hamilton Lodge Ball.
Mhm.
And you were saying that because of people's embodied performance, because of their audacity, they created possibility within the imagination of their attendees and in the community.
Mhm.
And I was just like, gasp. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. And also, that is contentious for people
Mhm.
um, in this current political moment. We have a very real problem of our political leadership attempting to erase the very presence
Mhm.
um, of queer people, of folks in drag, of trans folk,
Yeah.
don't say gay, right? And
Yeah.
and part of the strategy
Mhm.
of queer people has been like a kind of libertarian strategy. Well, just live and let live. What does my life have to do with yours? But if we take your intervention seriously, that becoming is collective, and that seeing a Black queer trans person be successful, seeing a Black queer person be happy, actually shifts or transmits something. It prompts imagination and what's possible. Then that live and let live libertarianism is actually kind of false, right?
Yeah.
It might be strategic politically, but it's not true.
Mhm.
So I'm just wondering if you could. I love that you told the truth. And I guess I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little more.
Yeah, thank you for that framing, and for driving the question a bit more, because yeah, the strategies that have been employed by queer people, by gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans people, they do matter. The means, I guess, as a person who's deeply invested in process, the means do need to, as I would imagine, need to be as rigorously interrogated as the ends, or the goals, the aims that we seek, the means by which we attain them, the strategies and the tactics, to ensure that we aren't sort of duplicating the logics of that which we seek to push against. And so it's funny to me when I think about this idea of live and let live, it's deeply grounded in um, the idea of sameness, in that I'm just like you. Therefore, because you can see that I'm like you, doesn't that mean you should leave me alone? Doesn't that mean you should let me live? Doesn't that mean I deserve life because I'm like you? And there's a time and place for these things. So I'm actually not wanting to put forward a strong critique against that right now. What I'm actually trying to do is point towards the ways that this idea of sameness and diminishing difference in order to gain rights is not just infecting the gay, lesbian, queer, trans community, but I mean impacts immigrant populations, impacts um, women who want to be successful, right? And so we adopt the logics of patriarchy, sexism, etc. Even nationalism, um, homo nationalism, as the scholar has called it. I think it was Ahmed. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but like all of this to say, those strategies in which sameness becomes, or live and let live, which is grounded in that idea of sameness, you know, the strategy itself, I find to be a bit faulty. And while there is great risk with, there's great risk that comes along with embodying difference, I think that time and time again, Black queer people, Black trans people have led the way in that, and form the foundations for other folks to be able to step into that as well. And I'm willing to argue around around that, leading the way, sacrificing their own bodies, so that we might arrive to where we are today, so that we can put on the cloak of sameness after what they have sacrificed. And so, you know, I want to also caution against this idea, not that you're saying this, but that representation will save us, whether it's in television or in any of the performative spheres where we're able to see Black queer stories or Black trans stories, that alone won't save us, that also, as Tourmaline and others have argued, that carries with it a burden as well of what it means to not only carry the stories of an entire people group on your entire book or your entire show or your entire what have you, but that also there's this burden of excuse me, this burden of the way that the stories are told in ways that don't honor what is truly at stake for Black, queer, and trans people. And so I would say that that's so that is why it felt so important to use immediate language or unedited language, minimally redacted stories in my book, because as Alexis DeVoe told me, commended me, it's important for us to speak ourselves for ourselves. And Audre Lorde affirms it. And so it's like, yeah, that's just my roundabout response to your provocation, but I think it is definitely an important one in terms of just thinking strategy, for sure, in this climate.
Thank you. And of course, we'll, as we have been for 10 years, the conversation will continue. I want to ask one more question before we open it up to the audience, for you all to, I'm not sure how we want to run this. I think we have a small enough gathering where if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question live, you can do so. Or if you want to drop it in the chat and have, I'm happy to read that question aloud if you want to do it that way. Okay, so lineage. I was reading your project and it reminded me a lot of Katie Cannon, at least her lament and her strategy, I think. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Katie Cannon is one of the founding figures of womanist theological ethics, coming out of Union Theological Seminary in the 1980s. And essentially, she went after dominant ethics, said that dominant ethics paints Black women as either immoral or amoral, meaning like outside of morality altogether. And her strategy against that, to make an intervention, was to turn to the work of Zora Neale Hurston and to use that as an archive to derive a set of values that Black women might live by, you know, unctuousness and unshouted courage and things like that. And I saw a kind of mirroring or a reflection of Dr. Cannon in your work, you with a bit of a twist. It's not just that Black queer persons are painted as immoral or amoral. For you, it's that Black queer persons are morally fecund. And for people who hate that word, Black queer persons are morally generative, right? There's something happening in our lives that make us worthwhile moral subjects, worthy of study. And so I was just curious about that resonance with Dr. Cannon. If you saw that, if that's just like haphazard, what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, first, shout out to the late Katie Geneva Cannon, and so much gratitude for groundwork laid, um, people read for filth in a scholarly manner. Hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick.
Come on.
Borrow from Zorno Hurston and Katie Cannon on that. Yes, shout out to her. But and also shout out to Nikki Young and Jennifer Leith, also Black queer ethicists, who also locate this Black queer fecundity as it relates to questions of ethics and we'll say moral agency. And I'll say for myself, as I began my work on gender, sexuality, religion, it began with womanism. So I was down working with Dr. Jacqueline Grant, also a founder of Womanism, um, working on her projects, hearing from her lens as a womanist and a womanist who was shaping a new discourse that was rejected and for which she experienced isolation. Katie Cannon experiencing the same. The stakes are high when folks air dirty laundry, so to speak. So
Mhm.
it's important that I lift them up in the space as well. And I guess this is just what today is going to be, lifting up all these voices, because they did so much in shaping who I became as a person and subsequently the work that I created. My colleague in Black Study, Boris Nunley, who's quoting another of our colleagues in Black Study, talks about how Black Study is life study. And so this research for this long line of people that I'm talking about, beginning in the late 1980s, it's not just a matter of us writing for writing's sake, or trying to get tenure, or wanting to establish our discourse for the community's approval or something to that effect. But it is what is at the center of all of what we are doing is, one, the project of liberation, as I mentioned before, or movements toward the liberative. That is what I got from womanism from the beginning, and that if I'm living this, that it also has to show up in what I create, what I choose to put out in the world. And
Mhm.
so Katie Cannon is among those foundational influences that I can honestly say, not even in terms of hyperbole, changed my life as a person, and then enabled me to enter when and where I do, as it relates to scholarship. And that there's a recognition within the work, as a Black feminist, as a womanist, that I'm concerned with whole communities, and that I recognize that real lives are at stake, that even if I am living in New York, or I'm living in Los Angeles, or I'm in the Bay Area, where I don't feel this same kind of precarity day by day, or I feel it to a lesser extent, there are still people all around this country, all around the world, who could really benefit from, at the very least, hearing that they are not in oppositional relationship always inherently to the religious, to the sacred, to the spiritual, and also that Black queer experience is a space for mining new possibilities for life and liberation, and for them to be able to take some pride in that. And that's the very personal piece of the work, and the reason that despite any hardship, I was committed to getting the book out.
I
Yeah.
hear that. Thank you. We didn't leave you all much time, so let me check the chat. Is there anyone who has a question? Feel free to unmute yourself. We probably have time for one question. If not, I have the perfect closing.
I don't want to be the one question. I'm a little nervous about that, but I did appreciate that you have made your kind of decisions around citational practices and choosing the people you wanted to write about. Like you've made that really, you've put that at the forefront of this talk, and I appreciate that. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned with the first photo of the person that you took the photo of by the river in Georgia at night. I'm curious about your process of kind of co-creation with people that you're taking photos of. Like, what does that process look like for you?
Thank you for the question, Jenna. I'll just go back to that one so we're all on the same page here. Yeah. So in all of my work, and thank you for framing the question the way that you did, because it allows me to say something about Black visuality, or what it means to freeze in time and space through an image a Black body. And how in the book I talk about sort of the posture to that I invite the reader or the viewer to take in taking in Black imagery, that I don't want the relationship to be one of consumer, or one of I'm coming to this picture wanting to grasp at something from it, looking even for meaning. But I wanted a sort of posture of being able to sit with the picture and being in a relationship of exchange, being in a relationship as an intimate, being willing to give to the image as well as to receive from the image. And that takes some vulnerability, and that also takes some stillness, as Tina Camp talks about, listening to images, attuning to the frequency, attuning to the image in a way that is not extractive, but that is, again, an intimate exchange. But to process, these are my community members, and as much as I am an artist, I'm also a member of community. And there's something about the artist asserting in a vision that to me feels very imperial and reifies the camera as a white gaze. And so to move the camera from its very long history of being the gaze and being this sort of intrusive presence that can dictate what can be said about a person, about a subject, about a topic, or something to that effect. I work with the subject, with the person, in order to presence more fully how they want to be presented in the image. And in this case, as Steve brought these materials of the Bible, of the bell, of the eleke, of the candles, of the sheet. She bought it all, and I bought the lighting and the camera, and we talked. And she said, "I'm going to stand right here in this river," and I said, "Okay, I'm going to stand right here at this bank." And as these one example, but also with Charlie and people in the background here, one of the subjects that's in the book, Natasha, and another, Michael, right? It was all conversations about what space feels sacred and important for them, and how or what do they want to presence in the space. So even the titles are from the interviews. They named these works they shaped the project. And in some ways, I lended my artistic eye and the resources that I have to bringing it to the fore. But I find it important to be deeply collaborative with all subjects and that I presence in my work, so that they're not objectified in the process of being made into an image.
Beautiful. Well, I know that we're at time. I see that someone just put in the chat that they have to go. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I want to say thank you, Dr. Ambrose, for this beautiful presentation and conversation. As always, I appreciate our collaboration. We're at least 10 years deep. And more to go. I just want to say thank you all for attending. Again, I'm Reverend Dr. Leonard Curry. Dr. Ambrose, I believe that you should have the last word, or someone from the Center for Ideas in Society. So I'm going to sign off and say thank you and turn it over to you all.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Thank you, Leonard, Dr. Curry, for taking the time. Congratulations to Jack C. and some, I think we mean Samantha Griggs here, our winners for this book giveaway. And thanks everybody for being here. Anybody at CIS have a final word? Bye,
Just
Dylan.
thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you all. Take care.